The night was colder than usual on the Wyoming plains, and the wind howled through the lonely ranch house like a grieving soul. Inside, a single lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. John Carter, a widowed rancher of 35, paced the room with his newborn daughter wrapped in his arms. Her cries pierced the silence like shattered glass, raw and desperate. He whispered soothing words that caught in his throat, his voice breaking as exhaustion and grief weighed heavy. It had been only 3 weeks since his wife, Emma, had died giving birth. Every night since, the baby's cries had become a haunting reminder of all he had lost. The ranch, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a tomb echoing with memories of love and loss. John's calloused hands trembled as he held the bottle of formula that his daughter refused. Her tiny body wriggled, her cries louder. He sank to his knees, feeling utterly defeated, praying for a miracle in the lonely dark. The nearest town was miles away, and the snow had fallen thick and merciless that week. John had tried everything, boiled milk, powdered formula, even warm water, but nothing worked. The baby wouldn't eat, and he feared each hour that passed was stealing her strength. His neighbors were far apart, separated by vast stretches of land and pride. He had always been a man who solved his own problems, a man who never asked for help. But tonight, pride meant nothing compared to the helpless wail of his child. Wrapping her tighter in Emma's old quilt, he stepped out into the freezing wind. His boots crunched against the snow as he trudged toward the faint light flickering from the next ranch over, a light that belonged to the quiet widow who lived alone, Mrs. Clara Evans. He had seen her at church before Emma died, always polite but reserved, her sorrow tucked neatly behind tired eyes. John never imagined he'd end up at her door in the dead of night, desperate and broken. Clara had been asleep when the knocking startled her awake. She hesitated, pulling her robe tighter as she opened the door. What she saw made her heart twist, a man drenched in snow, eyes hollow with grief, holding a screaming baby. "I'm sorry to bother you," John said hoarsely, his voice cracking. She won't eat. I don't know what else to do." Clara's gaze softened instantly. She had no children of her own, her husband having passed years before a child could fill the silence of her home. The sight of that tiny, red-faced baby stirred something deep within her, an ache she'd long buried. Without a word, she motioned him inside. The warmth of her hearth wrapped around them as she took the baby gently from John's trembling hands. "You poor thing," she whispered, her voice tender as a lullaby. "You must be starving." John stood helplessly by the fire as Clara sat in her rocking chair, holding the infant close. He watched in stunned silence as the baby quieted against her chest, instinctively nuzzling for comfort. Clara hesitated, her heart thudding, then she made a decision she hadn't expected. "John," she said softly, "I can help. It might sound strange, but I still produce milk. I nursed my sister's baby not long ago." His eyes widened with both surprise and relief. Words failed him as he nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. When Clara began to nurse the baby, the cries ceased completely, replaced by the soft sound of suckling. John's shoulders shook as he turned away, tears cutting paths through the dirt on his face. For the first time in weeks, peace settled over the small ranch house. The fire crackled, and the baby drifted into a deep sleep, her tiny hand clutching Clara's finger. As dawn crept over the horizon, John sat at Clara's kitchen table, clutching a mug of coffee that she'd made for him. The silence between them was thick but comforting. "You saved her," he finally said, voice raw with gratitude. Clara smiled faintly, her eyes red from her own tears. "No, John," she said softly. "She saved me." That morning marked the beginning of something neither of them expected. John began visiting Clara's home daily, bringing little Grace with him for feedings. Each visit stretched longer, filled with shy conversation and the fragile beginnings of trust. Clara showed him how to hold the baby properly, how to soothe her when she cried, and how to mix the formula right. John found himself opening up about Emma, the way she used to sing while hanging laundry, the way her laughter filled every corner of their home. Clara listened, her heart aching for the love he'd lost. As the weeks passed, the snow melted, revealing the fields beneath, a sign that spring was near. John began fixing the fences on his ranch, and Clara often came by with Grace bundled in her arms, watching as he worked. The once silent ranch was now filled with the gentle laughter of a baby and the warm hum of companionship. Yet, despite their growing closeness, John still carried guilt like a shadow. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, he stood on the porch with Clara beside him. "I feel like I'm betraying Emma," he confessed quietly. "Every time I look at you, part of me feels peace, but another part feels shame." Clara's eyes glistened as she took his hand. "Loving again isn't betrayal," she whispered. "It's survival. Emma wouldn't want you to raise that little girl alone in grief." Their connection deepened with every shared meal, every quiet evening by the fire, every sleepless night when Grace's cries brought them together. Still, small-town whispers began to spread. Folks talked in hushed tones at church, about the widowed rancher spending too much time with the lonely neighbor. John heard them, but he didn't care. The only opinion that mattered slept peacefully in Clara's arms. One afternoon, when a particularly cruel neighbor made a comment about Clara's intentions, John lost his temper. He slammed his fist on the fence post and said, "That woman saved my daughter's life. She's got more grace in her little finger than you'll ever know." Word spread fast, but so did respect. People began seeing the bond between John and Clara not as scandal but as something pure and healing. As the months passed, the ranch thrived again. John's crops grew stronger than ever, and he found purpose in every sunrise. Clara brought color back into his world, hanging curtains, planting flowers by the porch, filling the home with the scent of fresh bread. Grace grew, too, her laughter echoing through the open fields as she learned to crawl and then to walk. The ranch that had once been a place of mourning became a home of life again. Yet, as life regained its rhythm, John began to see that he didn't just owe Clara gratitude, he loved her. It wasn't sudden or fiery like the love he'd known before, it was gentle, patient, built on shared tears and quiet understanding. But he was afraid to speak it, unsure if she felt the same. One evening, after putting Grace to bed, John found Clara on the porch watching the sunset. He stood beside her, the silence between them deep and full. "Clara," he began, his voice low, "you've done more for me than I can ever repay. But there's something I've been afraid to tell you." She turned to him, her eyes soft and knowing. "You don't owe me anything, John," she said, but he shook his head. "I love you," he blurted, emotion thick in his throat. "Not because you helped me, not because you saved Grace, but because you brought me back to life when I thought I was done living." Clara's breath hitched as tears welled up. For a moment, she said nothing, then she stepped closer, placing her hand on his cheek. "And I love you," she whispered. "I think I always did." They married in the small white church at the edge of town that spring. The ceremony was simple, just a few close friends, a pastor, and baby Grace tugging at Clara's veil. As John slipped the ring onto her finger, the townsfolk who once gossiped now smiled through their tears. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a resurrection of two souls who had once believed their stories had ended. That night, as they returned to the ranch, the stars shone brighter than they had in years. Clara tucked Grace into her crib and stood beside John, gazing at the sleeping child who had unknowingly brought them together. "She's the bridge between what we lost and what we found," Clara murmured. John nodded, his hand finding hers. "She's the reason I believe in second chances." Years later, Grace would grow up running through the same fields her mother once loved, her laughter chasing the wind. She'd know the story of how her father, broken and lost, found not only help but hope in the kindness of a quiet neighbor. Clara would tell her how sometimes love doesn't arrive like a storm but like a whisper in the night, steady and saving. The ranch became known as Grace Haven, a name chosen by John to honor both the child and the mercy that had found them in their darkest hour.